Hello and welcome to Represent NYC from Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. The 2021 general election is now behind us and the results in New York City have been certified. As you likely know, Eric Adams will be the next mayor of New York City, and there's a full new set of government officials at the citywide, borough-wide, and city council levels set to take or retake office in January. As voters in New York City and across the state saw this fall, there were also 5 yes or no questions that were on the 2021 general election ballot. These were 5 proposals regarding potential changes to the New York State Constitution voted on by voters across the state. They dealt with issues including legislative redistricting, voting and election rights, environmental protections, and more. In order to appear on the ballot, these proposals had to pass 2 consecutive classes of the state legislature. In something of a surprise, 3 of the 5 were voted down by New Yorkers who cast ballots across the state this fall. Today, we're discussing those outcomes and what comes next. In just a moment, I'll introduce you to our 3 great expert panelists with me here for this discussion of the results on the 5 ballot questions and where New York goes from here on these topics. First, a quick review. The 5 proposals on the ballot this fall related to question 1, amending the apportionment and redistricting process in several ways. This proposal was voted down. Question 2, asserting a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment for all New Yorkers. This proposal was approved. Question 3, eliminating the 10-day advance voter registration requirement, paving the way for what's known as same-day voter registration. This proposal was voted down. Question 4, authorizing no excuse absentee ballot voting, thus paving the way for more New Yorkers to have the option to vote by mail without providing an excuse. This proposal was voted down. And question 5, increasing the jurisdiction of the New York City Civil Court, allowing that court to hear and decide claims up to $50,000 instead of the current $25,000. This proposal was approved. So that's a quick overview, but there's much more to discuss on these topics, and my guest today will get right into it. Pamela Stewart-Martinez is community organizer for voter engagement at We Act for Environmental Justice. Pamela, thanks for joining me. Robert Carroll is a New York State Assembly member representing parts of Brooklyn, and he's the Assembly sponsor of one of the voting bills that was question 3. Robert, thanks for being here.
Thanks,
and
Ben.
Diane Burrows is co-president of the League of Women Voters of New York City. Diane, thanks for being here. So thank you all for joining me. Let's get into these one by one in terms of what happened on the question and what comes next. So let's start with question 1 here. And Diane, the League of Women Voters was an interested party in question 1 on apportionment and redistricting. There were a lot of pieces to this question. Some of them were technical changes to the processes involved with legislative redistricting, but some of them were more about who gets to control the redistricting process and how maps are decided, and the process that's ongoing right now to change legislative districts for Congress and the state legislature. So can you sum up for us a little bit in terms of what happened on question 1, why there was some controversy over it, and where we stand now, please?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ben. The League of Women Voters statewide was opposed to the proposal number 1, mainly because the League really felt that it gave way too much power to the majority party, whichever one that may have been, and that the majority party really would have gotten to control way too much. When you mentioned about this being a very complicated proposal, it really was, in that there were so many pieces of it, including some pieces that the League very much supported. For example, counting incarcerated people where they're from, not where they're incarcerated. So it was a very difficult decision, but the feeling was that the overwhelming effect of it would have been to give the majority party way too much power.
Thank you. Yes. I'm not going to go through all the details of this proposal, and I want to come to Assemblymember Carroll now to speak about this a little bit, including the question of whether the legislature perhaps should not have included so many items in this one ballot measure, because again, there were sort of technical fixes to the redistricting process that many people, as Diane was just saying, agreed are probably necessary. But then there were also some that were more controversial. So Assemblymember Carroll, what are your thoughts on what happened here with ballot question 1, its defeat, the complications involved, and what comes next here on some of these issues?
Thank you, Ben. I think Diane's analysis is actually spot on. I think the amendment was too large and freewheeling. I did support the amendment, but I understand why so many folks decided not to support it. I do agree that it probably did go too far in giving the majority party too much power. But I supported it mostly because I did think it codified a lot of things that were really, really important to make our redistricting process fairer in the future. That being said, I would love to see the legislature propose a truly independent redistricting commission, which we still do not have, because I'll tell you right now, I don't want to be in charge of drawing my assembly seat or state Senate seats or congressional seats. I really think we should look at making sure that we have compact, contiguous districts that don't discriminate against groups that have previously not had access to the political process. I think those are the standards that we all agree on, and then we should allow an independent body to do it and see how it shakes out. So I hope that we realize our errors. We do that so that in 10 years' time, we're not back to the same place we are right now.
And this process is playing out as we speak. There's a redistricting commission. Some people call it the Independent Redistricting Commission. Some people don't want to use the word independent for reasons that have been mentioned, and others. But this is happening right now because every 10 years after the census, we redraw the districts in New York and of course around the country. And so that commission has been doing its work. Some of these parts of ballot question 1 would have impacted the commission's work basically immediately. And so now that commission and the legislature have a little bit of a trickier timeline ahead, as these districts need to be decided on pretty quickly here as we have primaries coming up in June, of course. As other parts of this ballot proposal included fixing the number of state senators at 63, requiring that New York State count the total population in the census, disregarding citizenship status in terms of counting overall population, and other factors. As I mentioned, it has a lot to it, as you both got it. So folks watching should read up on what the details of ballot question 1 were. There's really a lot to it, but it also includes the possibility for the legislative majorities, as you both said, to sort of take over the process, and that's where some of the questions were about it. But the timeline here for changing the district lines is really coming up. Assemblymember Carroll, just say a little bit more about where we're heading here in terms of that process. Folks watching this here in December of 2021, what do we need to know about how the legislature might approach this as we get into 2022 and the need for these maps to really be set pretty quickly?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know how quick it will be. Statutorily, they're supposed to present maps to the legislature by January 15th. I unfortunately think they'll end up sending us 2 sets of maps. I don't know, I haven't seen the maps, if we'll approve those maps or not. There is a part of that allows us to disapprove the maps, and then the commission set up another set of maps. Unfortunately, I think we are headed towards a place of uncertainty, possible litigation, and I think it really, really hurts the voters of the state of New York and gives them real pause for how their government is run. And so I hope we're able to come to some sort of agreement, but I do think that this might be a very complicated and long process, if I'm speaking frankly.
And Diane, what do you see coming up here? What should people be watching for? There's some limited opportunities still for New Yorkers to get involved, but this process has been ongoing for months already. But what are you looking for next, and what should people be watching out for, or most concerned about, or most hopeful about?
Well, there is going to be one more hearing that the Independent Redistricting Commission is going to be holding, and I believe it is this Sunday. Am I correct on that?
December 5th.
December, yes, thank you. So, so that's an opportunity for New Yorkers to get involved. You can sign up, you could testify. The testimony that I got to observe on Zoom was fantastic. I mean, New Yorkers really turned out. They really expressed their own concerns, their communities of interest. And I think that's a way to get involved and just be vigilant. Let's be vigilant and let's see what they're drawing and you know, how the line, what's going to happen when it does go to the legislature. I just think we have to pay very close attention.
Assemblymember Carroll, let me ask you, there's a lot of attention on redistricting in New York and elsewhere, and we've seen this issue of gerrymandering taking hold in many states where one party can determine the boundaries for legislative lines and are really trying to cement that party's hold. Some people say, hey, Democrats have control in New York and should really take advantage of that to counteract the Republican gerrymandering happening elsewhere. What's your viewpoint on that, and what do you foresee happening here as these lines get drawn in the new year?
Look, you know, unfortunately, politics does play a role if you allow the legislature to draw the congressional and state house lines. And so I'm not going to pretend that I'm naive to that. Now, I will say that what happens in New York State versus other states is very, very different. New York's population is very urban. And therefore, many of our districts, my district included, is overwhelmingly Democratic. And so gerrymandering becomes less pernicious, where when you're taking states that are more suburban and rural, where they're able to chop up slivers of urban districts and other places, they're much more easily able to craft in states like North Carolina, where maybe there is a slight Republican advantage, but the congressional delegation and the House seats are overwhelmingly Republican. And that's because they're breaking up communities, mostly communities of color. And so I'm not going to pretend that there is not politics involved in New York's redistricting, and especially if the legislature takes hold of the redistricting, which may happen. But I would say that it's much less pernicious. And that in a perfect world, we should have independent commissions. We should make sure that districts are compact, contiguous, and take into factors those communities that otherwise have not had seats at the table. And in a perfect world, that's what I would like to be seeing done. I don't think that's going to happen in New York this year. We should push for it in 10 years. But I do think that we will draw much, much fairer maps than some of our counterparts in other states.
Right. Well, two of the areas we're all watching to see will be mostly, you know, Democrats have had a large majority in your chamber of the state assembly for a long time. That's not going to change. The Democrats only recently took the majority in the state Senate, and those district lines could change somewhat significantly by this process. And then, of course, there's the House of Representative lines, which will really impact, you know, what happens in terms of control of the House on the federal level and how New York plays into the larger picture there. Much more we could discuss there, and maybe if we have a few minutes at the end, we can come back to it, but I want to get to each of these questions. Pamela Stewart-Martinez, We Act for Environmental Justice got a win here on question 2. What's going to happen in terms of environmental rights in New York? What does it all mean? What comes next?
I feel what happens next is certain bad actors will be held accountable for their actions to communities like communities of color or low-income communities, where they're not looking into the best interest of the folks in those neighborhoods. So I'm hoping the best, especially for NYCHA residents, because let's be honest, some of what's happening there, when we talk about a healthful environment, when we talk about clean air, you know, and clean water, we have developments that on the weekends, they don't even have water, let alone clean water. So I'm hoping that this will hold certain individuals accountable, whether they work within government or outside of government. I'm hoping that folks will do what they're supposed to do. I mean, to me, it's very sad that we had to go this far as to put it on a ballot to get people to look at this as what should be the case. But now that it's there, I'm happy about it. And so many folks that I know are very happy about it.
So all New Yorkers will now have a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. As you say, this will apply to the public sector and the private sector, to government actors and non-government actors. Are there next steps that your organization or other advocates are pursuing on this? Or is it now, okay, this is going to be enshrined and we're waiting to see how government and the private sector responds? There may be litigation that is forthcoming. Are there other steps you're pursuing, perhaps through the state legislature, that then follow up on this, or anything else in the offing? Or is it right now, this has been passed and we're sort of waiting to see how it goes?
Well, of course, we work on policy all the time. So we're always about organizing and policy. So definitely movement and policy and working with our state partners there to ensure that we go in the right direction. I also believe a lot of what I heard prior to this was that we were going to look at what worked in other states that already pushed us forward and see how that can be implemented in New York, if at all possible. So I think all options are open. Am I hoping for lawsuits? No, we're already known as like the most litigious state in the union. But for those folks who need a heavy arm, because they are truly not as concerned about community members and more concerned about filling their wallets, they should be held accountable in a court of law. And I look forward to that opportunity to see them there.
In terms of how New Yorkers might feel the impact of this, it puts a warning out there that this is now a right, as we said, to governmental and non-governmental actors. Would you expect New Yorkers to sort of see the results of this in their daily lives soon? Do you think, for example, as you said, the New York City Public Housing Authority, NYCHA, is going to have to more quickly address some of these issues? Private sector actors needing to clean up development sites more quickly. How might New Yorkers see this in their daily lives, do you think, in the next year? Honestly,
NYCHA, I'm not sure. There's a lot of things going on with NYCHA right now regarding RAD and PAC. I'm actually hoping for the best with NYCHA. I'm hoping that, the NYCHA representatives, election night, as soon as they saw that this bill went through, they said, okay, let's work on a plan. I'm hoping for that. As far as other folks, non-public folks, non-public sector folks, I hope that they've been working on a plan even before this.
And Assemblymember Carroll, what's your expectation here now that ballot question 2 has been passed? This right is being enshrined in the state constitution, clean air, clean water, healthful environment. How are you thinking about what this means and what comes next?
Look, I think it will create a private right of action. I think you're going to see a lot of lawsuits. I'm an attorney by trade. I'm not allergic to that. Lawsuits in this country have forged the way for so many important issues that have protected consumers, that have brought civil rights to our country, and clean air and clean water are a human right. And so the fact that folks can now go into a court of law and ask for recompense for damages that have been done to them or their families or their businesses, I think is really important. And we shouldn't fall into the canard that somebody, using the courts to defend themselves is in some way bad. These are not ambulance chasers. These are not phony lawsuits. Folks' water wells are poisoned. Folks' apartments are filled with lead paint. These are serious issues. And so I think this puts everybody, both the public and private sector, on notice that they are now going to be held accountable for the damages that they've caused.
Do you see follow-up in the legislature on this at any time soon, or is it too soon to tell?
I don't know of any bills particularly, but I'm sure that there are folks in the legislature who are looking at this and trying to figure out ways to fill out this new constitutional amendment.
Diane, let me come to you if you want to add any thoughts on question 2, but I do want to move into questions 3 and 4 because we will unfortunately run out of time much faster than we'd expect to here. Many advocates, many officials, many New Yorkers, including a majority of New York City voters, wanted questions 3 and 4 to pass. That would have paved the way for same-day voter registration and for no excuse absentee balloting. They both were voted down by New Yorkers across the state. What do you think went wrong there? What happened, and what's next on those two voting rights?
So first of all, I would like to point out that we did pass it here in Manhattan. So, so I think that's really important. And I think that I do not really understand what happens statewide, except to say that I really believe that there is a lack of confidence and a lack of trust in the Board of Elections being able to follow through on some of this. And the negative buzz that was heard, I think mostly upstate, seemed to address the issue of, well, how is the Board of Elections going to implement this? They couldn't implement other things. How are they going to implement this? So I think that a lot of it has to do with, of course, we know what's happening nationwide with claims of voter fraud, and that sort of somehow infiltrated these really, really powerfully good proposals that would have removed so many obstacles from people having access to the polls.
There was a concerted Republican and conservative effort to defeat these. There was a lot of discussion around same-day voter registration, which allows you to register to vote and cast a ballot on the same day. No excuse absentee balloting, mail voting, throwing up questions around the validity of those. Assemblymember Carroll, you have carried one of these proposals on same-day registration. What went wrong here from your viewpoint in terms of being a supporter of these, and what comes next?
So again, Diane's analysis, I think, is spot on. The kind of false flag narrative of voter fraud, I believe, was really, really led voters to vote these two really important amendments down. As the sponsor of the same-day registration amendment, it's very frustrating. I think it is really important that we redouble our efforts to say, making sure that everyone has access to the voting booth is a fundamental right and makes our democracy stronger. And that's not lip service. When folks feel like they have a place in representative government, they want to participate. And I want to make that note loud and clear, because we also had anemic turnout in our general election. We had an anemic turnout in our general election because our voting structures are kind of broken in New York. It's not just how we register to vote, but how we run our elections generally. And we need to really reinvigorate and relook at how we run our elections so that folks in New York from all stripes feel like they've got a say. And so I think that we had a reflexive negative outcome because folks thought, you know what, I don't trust the folks in Albany. I don't trust the people pushing this. And that led them down this path of it's voter fraud and that people are cooking the books. And so I would really like us to holistically look at this and say we need to re-engage and relook at our elections so that we don't have anemic turnout when we're electing the mayor of the largest city in America and one of the most important urban figures in the world. And that's really a sad state for our democracy.
Now, you and your Democratic colleagues, since having the majority in both houses, have passed a lot of voting and election reform, including the implementation of early voting, which expands opportunity for people to vote quite significantly. There's also been an expansion of absentee mail-in voting because of the pandemic. But again, that was done by executive order. This would have enshrined it into the state constitution, question 4. But given that these questions did pass in New York City, but to your point, there was such anemic turnout that couldn't carry over the rest of the state, wasn't there a bit more here that was about the fact that the New York City general election for mayor and other offices wasn't really competitive and didn't really get a lot of people excited about coming to vote because of a lack of competition, not because of a lack of access to the ballot?
Agree 100%. And I think we desperately need to look at ways to reform our general elections. We need to look, I think, at nonpartisan primaries so that we have the two strongest candidates appear on the general election ballot, which in New York City would almost always be two Democratic candidates. And I think that would create a much more competitive election. I'm working on legislation right now to do just that in all of our elections, except for the presidential primary, where it would not be permitted. Because we need competitive elections. Competitive elections create high turnout. It's just like, a lot more people watch Game 7 of the World Series or the NBA Finals than a random game in the middle of the summer. You need to have that competition.
So because we're in our final couple minutes here, just a couple last quick questions for each of you. Assemblymember Carroll, so on your bill for paving the way for same-day voter registration, you expect to reintroduce that next session and start it towards the process again of passing 2 consecutive classes of the legislature and being back on the ballot in a couple of years?
100%. I'm undeterred. We're going to get this done and we're going to get it back on the ballot, and I'm convinced it'll pass.
And Diane, do you expect that to be the case as well for no excuse absentee voting? Have you heard anything else from legislators about possibly changing the path ahead there?
I personally have not heard anything, but our goal really is, here we are right now. So our job really is to educate voters, get people engaged. And I totally agree with what you were saying about voter turnout. That is our goal, and to educate voters as, here are the rules now. We've got to change them, but here are the rules now. Let's move it forward and get everybody the information they need to get out there and vote.
And I'll just underscore the point also that both Diane and Assemblymember Carroll made, which about the New York City Board of Elections and election administration more generally needing to perhaps be addressed alongside some of these measures to give people more confidence in enacting voting reforms and those being well managed. Pamela, Stewart-Martinez, lastly to you, if people around New York State, now that question 2 passed, if they want to learn more about what it means, should they reach out to We Act? Should they be looking somewhere else? What do you expect to sort of come in the months and years ahead in terms of education to New Yorkers around what this means?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because we are going to be creating a whole slew of workshops around that ballot proposal, about NYCHA. That's going to be a continual thing with us. And we also have some workshops that are going to cover redistricting. We want to make sure that our constituents in our community and folks who care about their communities are able to understand every aspect of the election process and political process in New York State. So definitely reach out to We Act and you'll see our schedule, and it's going to be chock full of workshops regarding politics and environmental issues.
Very good. And We Act, of course, among a number of groups that does somewhat similar work or cares about environmental issues, environmental justice, nature conservancy, and the expansive support that was around ballot question 2, in part helping it to pass. We have to leave it there. Thank you all for joining me. And thank you for watching Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Represent NYC. I'm Ben Max from Gotham Gazette. See you soon.